to combining images together in Photoshop. So in this video today, we're going to take 4 different images and we're going to combine them together into a collage within Adobe Photoshop. So first thing, I grabbed these 4 photos from Unsplash to use in my Photoshop collage. So whenever I work with something like this where I'm pulling from multiple images, I like to keep those images separate in their own files in case I need to go back and use them again or go back and refer to them in their original state. So I'm going to duplicate those into a new document. So I want to set up my new document in the correct size. So I'm going to go to File, New, or Command or Control N. I'm going to create my new document. For this project, it is 8 by 8 at 300 dpi. I'm going to set the color mode to CMYK, which is the printing, since I would like to print this project. And I'm going to hit create. That's going to create a nice artboard for me. So this is going to be my final output. So then I'm going to duplicate all these photos into that space. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. I could, for instance, I'm going to grab this one. I'm going to just say select all. I'm going to copy, so edit copy or Command C. I can come over here and I can just paste it in. It's there, it's just really big. Another way I could do it is that if I open it, go into this slice of pizza one, I can simply go into my layers panel from the drop-down menu. I can say duplicate layer and I can send a destination document. I'm going to send it into Untitled 1. That's my new one. I'm going to hit OK. And that duplicated it into here as well. I can also, if I wanted to, I can say File, File, Place, Linked or Embedded. So I can hit Place Embedded. I can locate that photo from where I've downloaded it and hit place. That is another way. This is going to size when you place it like that. So I can see that this is sizing to 7%, the original size. If I look up here, it is 7%. And then I want to size that appropriately. So I'm going to size this to be at least as big, if not bigger than what I need. And then I will click the check mark to accept that placement, or the no will not. We'll undo that placement. Now that's placed in. So for the last one, I'm just going to duplicate over again, duplicate layer. And now I have all 4 of my images into this document. So notice that the one I hit place embedded, that has this little icon right here, that means it's a smart object, so it's not editable as it's linking back to that original image. So as I size it, it's going to retain information. We're not going to cover too much on smart objects in this video. There's a little more to them, but just realize that that's what that little icon means. So now I've got all 4 photos into my working document. Now I can begin editing this collage. So in my collage, I have planned out that I want to have this space image as my background, and then the other items, the cats and the pizza, floating around in outer space. So I need to drag those layers into a correct order. Since this is my background, it should go down to the bottom of the layer stacking order. That makes it the background. So if I turn these on, they're on top of them. And there are those images. So I'd like to work with them one at a time to get them appropriately sized, named, and moved around. So let's go to layer 1. That is this cat right there. I'm going to name him, I don't know, cat with paw up. That sounds like a good layer name. Always name your layers something that means something to you. That way when people, if somebody else works on your working document or you come back to that document weeks, months, years later, it makes sense as to what you mean. Never leave anything just being unlabeled 1, unlabeled 2. That's not a good working order. All right, so when I turn the visibility of that layer on, This is huge. So I'm going to scale it down because it is 100% that size. I don't need it to be that big. So something that I can do if I'm not certain about what I want to do with it size-wise, I can right-click or control-click on this and convert it to a smart object. And that will give me that little icon. That way if I size and change my mind bigger or smaller, it's not losing that information as I make it bigger or smaller. So in order to do this sizing, that is Command or Control T or Edit Transform, Free Transform. So I'm in my Free Transform right now. Newer versions of Photoshop, you do not hold down Shift to constrain the aspect ratio. Let me undo that real quick so you can see the difference. Let me zoom out so you can see the whole photo. So if I go to Edit, Free Transform, here's my photo. There's the cat. I'm not going to hold down the Shift key, and that's going to scale proportionally. If I hold down the Shift key, I can now move it around. So you want to make sure that if you're scaling your images, you do not warp them. So be aware that older versions of Photoshop, you had to hold down Shift to constrain proportions. They flipped it for no good reason. So just be aware, I often forget and hold down Shift when I'm scaling and then warp my photo and mess it up. So I'm going to scale that cat to be right around that size. I think that's a good size. Scale him just a little bit more. I want him to get the whole background in here just because I know I'm going to remove that background from that cat. And that's a good working size for me to work from. I'm going to go through and do the rest with my other layers. Alright, I'm going to name him Orange Cat, and then name this one Pizza. Alright, so now let's go back and edit some of these layers. So I've got them all in here. I'm going to start working on this as a collage. So I'm going to do the cat with the paw up. And because it's a smart object, if I click on any of these things, if I say I want to get rid of this blue background, which I do, so that it becomes a collage, if I go grab like an eraser tool or anything like that, I get the little no symbol. And that's because it is a smart object. Smart objects don't let you do any of those editing features to them. It's because it's linking back to that original image. So if I know that this is the size that I want it to be, and I know I want to start really messing with this photo, I need to rasterize it. So I'm going to right click on it and hit rasterize layer. Now you see I can go ahead and erase that. So I'm going to just select and mask out this background, and I'm going to do my best to get some of this fur. Fur and hair are very tricky. They take a lot of work to get a nice crop to them. I will do my best to have it kind of blend into the background. The thing I don't want to have happen is a big blue shadow on it. So I'm going to grab my quick selection tool. I'm going to brush around this background here. It's doing a pretty good job, except it got the whole cat now. We don't want the whole cat selected. Let's brush out some of this cat. So I'm holding down the Option or Alt key to minus that selection so I can deselect the cat, because my quick selection brush got a little overzealous in grabbing my kitty cat. So there we go. That's decently. If I zoom in, never be afraid to zoom in on it. It's a decent selection. However, I've got all these little tufts of fur that I want to do a slightly better job at grabbing and masking into this. So I'm going to hit select and mask up here. This is going to take me into that masking mode. Actually, I'm going to hit cancel real quick. I want to invert the selection, so I can go to select, inverse. Now I'm going to hit select and mask. That's just a little easier to see what I'm doing. There we go. So then I can see it's kind of fading out that background. So I can see when I mask it. You can adjust this transparency here if I want to make that selection completely transparent. And I like to have a little bit of transparency so I can see where I'm going. I'm going to turn on edge detection. I'm going to make it a couple pixels big. I'm going to hit smart radius because I want it to try and grab some of these hairs. Photoshop does a pretty decent job of starting to grab some of these hairs in there. And realizing that I can turn this up, please, with your own photos, take a look at what it's doing when you turn that up. Don't be afraid to start messing around with the settings and say, oh, is that doing a better job? You can see it's doing a much better job grabbing some of these hairs on that cat. They're never going to be perfect. Like I said, you can spend a lot of your time going in and going almost pixel by pixel grabbing hairs, but it's doing a pretty good job on little tufts of Kitty's ears here. Global refinements, you can smooth it, you can feather it, you can shift the edge. Let's take a look at what those look like. So if I want to smooth that edge a little bit, let's turn it all the way up so you can see the difference. That's smoothing. Oh, too smooth. Let's turn that back down. It just ended up grabbing everything. Let's turn that way back down. Grabbed everything. Typically with these settings, you don't go too far away from where you started. Feathering kind of softens that edge, so you really don't want to have a harsh edge. Contrast. Pull that up. It's doing okay. And edge, shift the edge. Let's move that. See how it gets it kind of harsh. That's too much. That's giving me way too harsh of an edge. Let's pull that way down. Like I said, typically don't go too far away from 0. If you go too far, a lot of times your selection that you've made is not very good. And that's doing a pretty decent job of grabbing that kitty cat. There's other options. If I keep going down here, I can select my output settings. So decontaminate color, output to selection, layer mask, new layer. So if I wanted to layer mask it, that can save that as a layer mask for me. So let's click OK and see what that looks like. Boom. So I made that selection. I turned the output into a layer mask that's already masked it for me. And there's the mask, there's the cat. So this is non-destructive editing like we've covered before, where I want to, if I said I really didn't do a good job or your settings weren't quite right, you want to go back into it, you can totally go back into that, that mask mode and adjust your masking around this. That is not there. The full photo is still there. So if I control click over the mask and hit disable layer mask, there's the kitty cat. If I wanted to, I'll re-enable that. If I want to actually go in and adjust that mask down to a pixel point where maybe it's, I see I've got a little bit of teal here, I can edit that. So I can, with that mask selected, I'm going to grab my paintbrush. So I've got that selected in layers panel, and I could actually paint in that fuzzy area. This brush is way too harsh. Let's turn that down. And I'm even going to turn down the opacity and the fill to really soften it up as I get in and just kind of take out any of this remaining teal color with my brush. Let's zoom in on that kitty cat and get it a little softer and nicer. And you see, so I can edit that. It's fully editable as a mask. And I can even, if I wanted to, grab my eraser tool and I can paint back in what I might think that maybe it didn't quite get those hairs too much. Like I said, it does a pretty decent job. It's never going to be perfect. What you want to avoid is just that harsh round edge that you often see when people clip, especially with something that is fuzzy like a kitty cat. All right, let me zoom out. I'm going to call him good. I could spend many more hours on this, but this is about getting in these photos and getting them clipped. I will come back and work with him a little bit later. So let's move that kitty cat here. I'm going to actually turn that layer off. Let's work on the pizza. So same idea, although for me, I know in this composition that I do want to get rid of, I may destroy some of this because I really just want the slice of pizza. I don't want the beer, I don't want the seasonings. So I can get a little destructive with this if I want to. If I said absolutely not, don't need it, don't want it, I can select a chunk of that photo and just hit delete. You can see in the layer panel that that is gone. And now I've got just a little bit less information to work from. If you're hyper concerned about file sizes and you said there's a lot of extraneous information, I only need a chunk of something, and you absolutely know you don't need the whole thing, you can delete that stuff. It will can reduce your file size if you are concerned about taking up space on a server or hard drive or something like that as you're working. Photoshop files tend to get beefy. All right, so let's take a look at this pizza here. I'm going to grab my quick select tool because I like it. Clicking, clicking, clicking. And then I've gone a little too far, so let's put my Alt key, actually make my brush just a little bit smaller. Brush out some of these areas where it didn't do a very good job. I'm actually really not liking how this is grabbing some of this, so maybe I'm going to do a slightly different selection method. And this is up to you as an artist, as a designer. Certain photos work really well for certain selection tools, as we covered last time. Other times can be a little tricky. Let's see how the magic wand does in grabbing these pixels and see if it does a little better job. Let me turn my tolerance up just a wee bit, maybe to like 17. So magic wand grabs by color around it. So since I'm selecting this white, because it's got a pretty harsh white border, I feel like that's doing a little better job of getting some of the nuance of the pizza. Holding down Shift to make that selection, or to add to my selection, Alt to minus. And that's not bad, because I want to retain some of this shadow when I clip it out. That's not too terribly bad. I like it. All right, so I want to grab some of those extra areas. I'm going to grab my polygonal lasso tool because I want to grab these corners. I'm just going to hold down Shift. That adds to that selection that I've already got. And it just do a rough cut all the way around, and you see that that's adding to that selection. I don't have to be hyper specific because there's nothing out in these extra areas around here. Great. Now I've got a really weird looking selection, but now I can go to Select, Inverse, and hit my mask. And now that's masked out just that pizza. It's got some pretty rough, gnarly edges to it that we will go back and smooth after we do the other cat. But there's the pizza flying into space. And let's grab this orange cat and cut him out too a little bit. So I'm going to do the same type of thing where I'm going to grab my quick select tool. I'm going to brush around the background, and I will do the select and mask just like we did the first cat. So invert my selection, go to select and mask. And there's the kitty cat. Alright, let's get his fluffy head here a little bit. So I'm going to do this. Make sure I'm on object aware. I am. I'm going to grab more of the radius. I'm going to hit smart radius. Let's see if we can grab a little bit more of this. Grab my brush tool and see if I can brush in more of that selection here, because it's not doing a very good job of finding his head. When you have nice clean edges like in that first photo, it's a little bit faster to do. This photo has some really soft edges to it around the fluff of the kitty cat. So you have brushes here. The first one up here is quick selection. Next one is refine edge, brush tool, object select tool, your lasso, your hand to move around, and then your zoom in and zoom out. So I'm going to continue working on around this cat and his hairs. I've grabbed the refine edge brush tool. I'm just going to brush around his little bobcat ears to see if I can grab those edges a little bit better. It just lets Photoshop know that there are edges up here to look for that it may have missed. So if you've got a lot of flyaway hairs, fluffy fur, you want to go around and kind of make sure that it's got it where it's not necessarily always doing a good job. This is kind of a tricky photo to work with just because the background and the cat's body are fairly similarly toned. So I'm going to smooth this out just a little bit. I like to add a little bit of a soft feather. Alright, and then my output, I'm going to say go ahead and make a layer mask with it. And whenever you have it where you want, you click OK. Now I've got a nice layer mask. There we go. There's my kitty cat, looking pretty decent. It had a hard time, I'm not sure why, grabbing this chunk of his head. So I'm going to smooth that back out. Realize that Photoshop, while it is powerful, is never more powerful than the human eye. I'm going to brush back in his head here. Can kind of tell why Photoshop is having a tough time. It's a weird edge. It kind of gets a little smushy there. So that's a little bit better. Alright, so I want to move him. I might leave him right there simply because that's the edge of the cat. Alright, so now let me figure out my composition. I've got my 3 elements on a background. Now it comes time to figure out the placement of my objects, scale, relative scale, size, placement. So this is where, if you'd started ahead of time, a grid is a great place to start working and organizing and figuring out your layout of your elements. So I'm going to put a 3x3 grid down onto this artboard that I'm working on. So I want to turn on my rulers. That is Command or Control R to turn on or off your rulers. And then my rulers are set to pixels right now. I want them to be inches. That's just a little bit easier for me to draw out guides from. So I'm going to change that quick. I'm going to click on the word Photoshop. I believe for a PC it's under File. And then go to Preferences. And then I'm going to grab my units and rulers. And in here I'm going to change rulers to inches. And click OK. And you see that the rulers have changed. So because this is 8x8 and I want a 1/3 and 1/3, I need a ruler guide drawn out at 2.66. So I'm just going to click and drag to 2.66. And that is approximately 1/3. So to drag a guide, you just click on the ruler and draw over. So I will draw another one at 5.33. My screen just changed into night mode for no reason. And there's approximately a third. I will do it from the top down as well. And there I've got my 1/3 by 1/3 grid that I can work from and now start organizing elements within that grid. So I would like to keep this orange cat towards the bottom. I think I'd like him to kind of look up at the pizza. And then put the pizza kind of somewhere decently centralized. But right now he's a little too big for me. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and let's just scale him down a little bit. For my composition, I'd almost like him to be kind of eyeball right in this corner. I think that's a decent spot for him to sit. I'll hit return to confirm that transform. And for my little kitty cat up here with the paw up, I'm going to kind of make this a little more dynamic instead of top to bottom. So I'm going to flip that kitty cat around. Let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to do free transform again, which is edit, free transform, or Command or Control T. I'm going to spin that kitty cat around. Interesting. I kind of like that coming in off of the corner. I kind of want to flip it a little bit. So I'm going to hit return. I'm going to go to edit, transform, and I'm going to say flip horizontal. That'll flip on a horizontal grid, and that just flips it. Now he looks like that. So he's kind of coming in from the side, and I'm making kind of this composition here. So maybe if he comes over here, I have auto select turned on. That way when I'm grabbing my move tool, wherever I grab it, it's going to grab the layer that I'm working on. And I can move and adjust these elements around. So I put basically both of their noses kind of square into these. Boop, boop. And that makes kind of an interesting dynamic where you now have a strong diagonal across the artboard. Now I just have to figure out where I want to put that pizza. Maybe I want to have multiple pieces of pizza. That might be interesting. So let's work on that. That pizza's too big for one. It's kind of dominating these kitty cats here. There we go. Make it a little smaller. And let's zoom in. I want to refine some of these edges quick. So I'm going to go back to that quick mask mode. Or not quick mask, excuse me. That is the wrong thing to say. I'm just clicking on the layer mask. And I'm going to just kind of softly erase out into that. I believe it's a paintbrush tool for this. I often get those confused whether or not it's the paintbrush or the eraser. So it's a paintbrush because I'm adding to that mask. If you mess up, just undo and it's the other one. I'm just going to kind of mask some of that out. That's a star in my background. That's not part of that image. Just to kind of softly fade this harsh edge that I got from using it. This is another way you can do your selections if you don't enjoy that, the other way of masking and making the selections. There's a lot of ways you can do stuff in Photoshop. It's just, it comes down to more your comfort level and really even the type of photo you're working with. Some photos are a lot easier to manipulate, and other ones get very tricky if it's very tonal. Just gotta soften some of these harsh edges there. I'm gonna add a shadow of the pizza too. All right, that looks a little better. A little softer. Let's turn that pizza too. Just to make it, since we're working with a fairly dynamic composition, I kind of line it up where I've got this diagonal going the other way, the pizza's pointing. There we go. So now I've got my cats. They are looking at stuff. They're looking at pizza. So their eye, it makes a nice focal point if you see that their eyes are both looking up. One to the center, the other one to the center. That looks pretty nice. I want to add a couple more pieces of pizza just because this is kind of a little bit boring. I'd like a few more floating around at different sizes. I'm also going to use that pizza as a convention because this image cuts off. There's no more kitty cat here. That's the edge of the bounding box of this kitty, which I don't like. I don't enjoy that there. So I'm going to actually use a pizza to cover it up. So I'm going to just duplicate this layer as it already is. So I'm going to, in my layers panel, click on that menu and just hit duplicate. It's going to stay in the same. It's going to be pizza copy. Now I've got two of them there. I grab my move tool here and I'll move some pizza around. I'm going to move the orange cat underneath so I can use this pizza as a way to kind of cover up. Whoops, I want it bigger. I want to turn it. Cover up the fact that there's no more cat there. Panel's kind of in my way here. Fly that back in. There we go. My pizza just the way I want it, and then accept the change. Nice. I'm going to add a couple more. Remembering rule of thirds, people like the number 3. So I'm going to work with either having 3 slices of pizza or 5. Odd numbers are always good. I'm going to do 5 just because I think that way I can kind of get almost an X grid here with pizza slices. So I'm going to duplicate again. I'm going to make this one much smaller. It's supposed to be smaller. There we go. Turn it around. Pizza flying everywhere. I'd like to make him obviously smaller. And I'll mess around with placement and go that way. Just make it kind of dynamic. Great. I'm going to duplicate that one because it's already small. Put it up here. Rotate it. I'm going to grab my big one, the original one, duplicate that one more time. And I'm going to put it up in that top left corner. I kind of have it touching the corner a little bit just to kind of activate that space. So it's not just a blank corner. Figure out how to put it in there, maybe something like that. Let's rotate it down just a little bit more. Directional element here. Boom. And there I have pizza flowing all the way through this composition. A large part of doing any composition is you're going to spend a lot of time Could be minutes, could be hours, figuring out where do I want things to go, how do I want them to be placed, etc. That's a big part of designing anything. So far that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with it. I can toggle on and off my guidelines by hitting Command or Control colon. It is the colon key. We'll turn that on and off. It is also, if you see this highlighting under view, guides, show guides. So mine will say hide guides if I can figure out where that is. I always just hit the key. So to finish up this composition, I've got my kitty cats, my pizza in space. I'm just going to do a few tweaky effects onto the images here to make it a little more dynamic. Right now, like, there's a really nice highlight on this cat that kind of matches the highlight of the background. There's some nice lighting on the pizza too. This cat up in the corner feels just a little bit soft. So I'm going to just up his level. So I'm going to select that layer, cat with paw up, and I'm going to just adjust the levels to that. So I'm just going to give him a little more contrast. So I'm going to slide in some of these dark tones and just pay attention to just this cat. We'll slave this effect to just that cat in a minute. I'll make him a little lighter, and I think I'm going to deepen up his midtones just a little bit. That looks good. Now you see that that's affecting both layers below it, so both the cat and the background. Now if I like that, I can leave that there, but I don't really want to adjust my background too much. I like the photo as it is. So to slave that effect to this layer, I'm simply going to hover over the layer, hold down the Alt key, and you see that little down arrow appearing. When I click that, it will now lock that to just this layer. This little arrow says I'm applying to this layer and this layer only. So it's no, let me do that one more time so you can see it. The levels is affecting both, all the layers below it. I want it to just be affecting this layer. So I'm going to hold down that Alt key right in between the two layers, and that arrow shows up, and then that slaves it to just. So now the levels are just affecting that cat. So we can see if I move these sliders that now just that cat is being affected. Definitely went way too far, but I added just a little bit of little more dynamic light so I can see the difference before and after. He's a little more dynamic. So now I want to vignette my edges. I kind of want all the edges to be a little bit darker all the way around. So I'm going to add a radial gradient layer over top. It's my favorite way to add a vignette if you're trying to give any photo an antique where it's kind of burning and darkening those edges. That's called a vignette. So I'm going to add a radial gradient over top. So I'm going to create a new layer. So in my layers panel, I'm just going to click the flyout, hit new layer, Shift Command N. And I'm going to call this vignette. I need to move that all the way to the top because I want it laying over top of everything. There we go. I'm on my vignette layer. I'm going to grab my gradient tool, and by default it will look like this. I'm going to select my radial gradient, which is right here. There's other gradients there as well. Angle, reflected, diamond. The reflected one is cool if you're ever trying to make anything look like it's reflecting onto something else. And then from my center point, I'll turn my guides back on so I can see it. I'm just going to hold Shift and draw a line straight up. That draws the gradient for me. So now because I have my color set to black and white, it's white in the center, black on the outside. The gradient will draw whatever you have for your standard colors. I just want it to be black and white, so I have it like that. Now it just kind of obliterated everything. I'm going to add some blending modes to make that look like it's blending down. So I want the white to go away, so instead of normal I can set it to multiply. That makes the white go away. You see the white is gone, and now I just have those black outlines. I can lower my opacity, which will allow me to see through it. Now I think there's just too much black in general, so I can make this layer bigger. So I'm going to hit free transform, which was Command T, and I'm going to hold the Alt Option key to scale from the center and just scale that a little bigger. I want that white area to be a little larger, so I'm getting more of the image. Now that that is darkened, and I can adjust that as I want to, and you see that just adds some black over to everything. And I don't totally love this look. It's kind of losing a little bit, so let's play with some of the other modes in here. Because this can add a lot of dynamic, almost lighting to this really quickly and easily. This is color burn. It's going to burn in those harsh areas of color. Linear burn, darker color, it removes the darker colors. Anything in this section, light and screen, color dodge, actually takes out color. So where there's black, it's removing things. Overlay looks like I've overlaid it on top, like a screen. That looks interesting and I like it. Soft light feels like a light, a soft light, or a hard light, or a vivid light. Vivid light is also interesting. Linear light, pin light. Hard mix is generally really harsh. Difference exclusion, subtract divide hue, actually puts those colors over top of it. That's interesting. Saturation takes out the saturation, which for this instance I don't want. But what I did like was that overlay look. So I'm going to select overlay. And that's the difference I have by adding that. So let's turn it on and off so you can see. Before it looks like that, this just kind of darkens up the corners because I have that black gradient over top. Adds a little bit more dynamic light to this. Gives me a real strong focal point in the center. And I think that just polishes up this composition pretty nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and save this for myself. I'm going to go to File, Save. And I'm just going to save it to my computer. You can always save things to your Creative Cloud. And I'm going to call this Cat Collage. And I will save a working Photoshop document for myself. That allows me to get back in. I'm going to hit OK on Maximize Compatibility. Now I've got a working Photoshop document that I can return to anytime I want to with all my layers in here. If I would like to export this for printing, I'm going to just do a File, Save As, and I can save it as a TIFF being a lossless compression file, and hit Save. I will set the image compression to LZW, that makes it slightly smaller. Hit OK. That's fine, it's going to increase layers. Great. Now I've got a TIFF hanging out that I can print from. So I located that on my computer. Here's my final TIFF. There's a preview of it. That looks great. And then there's my layered Photoshop document. So those are my final files for export. There is my awesome kitty collage that I've made using Adobe Photoshop and some basic layer editing tools. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.